Okay, so we're going to be walking through exercise 45-6. You'll need the makeup DB file from eConestoga. So if you haven't downloaded that, please go ahead and download that now. Once you've downloaded it, you'll notice that there's a couple of extra columns and rows that we need to get rid of. So we'll go ahead and do that as part of the cleanup first. So I'm just going to delete these 3 columns and these 2 rows. I'm going to expand so that all the column names are shown. I'm going to bold my title just so it stands out. So then if we look at the data that we have, our first column is the transaction number, then we have the name of the salesperson, the date of the sale, product, the number of units, dollars, and the location. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to I'm going to change name to salesperson, just so that it's a little bit more descriptive. So when I put it in my pivot table, I know exactly what I'm dealing with. And what we're looking for in this case is we're looking to create a couple of pivot tables. The first one is related to the number of sales transactions for each salesperson, which is why I renamed name to salesperson. For each salesperson, the total revenue by product. And then we're going to use some find pivot table data functions. And then we're also going to look at the total revenue generated by each salesperson broken down by location and the total revenue by salesperson and year. So you can see that we've got the date of the sale, so we'll be able to do that relatively easily within the pivot table. So the first thing that we're going to start with is the number of sales transactions for each salesperson. So I'm going to start by going to insert on the toolbar pivot table. So as you know, I can either create within my current worksheet by using here, or I can select one of the other existing worksheets within this. Or I can create a new sheet. In this case, I'm going to create a new worksheet. You don't want to create the pivot table on the same sheet as your data, just in case your data gets corrupted or you need to add additional fields or whatever. It's best to have it in its own separate sheet, but you can have multiple pivot tables in the same sheet, which is what we're going to do. So now I'm going to rename this to pivots. And then the first thing that we're going to do is we're looking at the number of sales transactions for each salesperson. So I need to pull in my salesperson. So the salesperson drops into the rows. That's perfect. That's right where I want it. And then I want to do the number of transactions. So I've got the transaction number here. If I bring that into the values, the default, because it's a number, is that Excel's going to sum that number. That's not what I want, right? Because I want the total number. And if I go back to the data, you can see that this is counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the total is 1,891 transactions. But the sum is, I think that's 1.8 million. So if I look over here, I've got 1.8 million. I do not want 1.8 million. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the value settings, the value field settings, and I'm going to change this from sum to count. Press OK. And then you can see I've got the total number of transactions by salesperson. They're all around the same. CC seems to be doing a really good job, but otherwise they're all pretty pretty much around average. So I'm just going to add a row in here so I can add the title to my pivot table. So this is going to be the number of sales transactions by salesperson for, and let's go back and look at our data. This is going from 2004 to 2006. Put a filter on that, I can see. So 2004 to 2006 sounds good. 2004 to 2006. And then I'm going to bold that. And then we're going to just change this from count of transaction number to number of transactions. Salesperson looks good. Total looks good. And that's all for that one. Now I'm going to go and I'm going to do my, my next pivot table. And in order to do that, you can either go back to your data or you can just copy and paste your existing pivot table. I'm going to copy that a couple of rows below. In this case, I now want the total revenue by product for each salesperson. So I've already got the salesperson. I no longer want the number of transactions. Now I want to bring in my dollar value. So in this case, you can see that it has summed the dollars, which is what we wanted to do. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to change my formatting for my number. So the value field settings, I'm going to go to my number format, and I'm going to use the currency format so that it looks a little bit nicer and I can clearly see the total value of sales by salesperson. So the other element that we wanted to include in this pivot table was the product. So if I click on product, you'll see that you can kind of see Ashley sold $5,844 worth of eyeliner, $4,186 of foundation. But having product nested under the salesperson doesn't make sense because there's no parent-child relationship between those two fields. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the product up to the columns. And that is a little bit easier to follow. You can see the total amount of sales for Ashley. You can see the total amount of sales for each product. So it's a little bit easier to consume this way. And that's what's most important. We want to make sure that our reader of the pivot table is easily able to understand the data that's being presented. So this one, I'm just going to copy my title from up here. And then I'm just going to change this to revenue by product by salesperson. Let's make our titles a little bit bigger. And then the next piece on this one is you want to create a function that always yields Jen's lipstick sales. So in order to do this, we're going to use the get pivot table data function. So in order to do that, I'm just going to put it up here. And what I'm going to do is I want to look at what fields we're going to be looking for within the pivot table. So the first field is my salesperson. The next one is my product. And I want to look for Jen's sales of lipstick. And then total revenue is what I'm looking for. So in order to do this, I start typing get pivot data. And what I want to look for is my dollars. And you can see down here, it's the sum of dollars. And then the pivot table, you're just going to select the top left corner of the pivot table. And did not work. Comma. And then we're looking at our fields. So the fields that we want to look at are salesperson. And then the item, which is the salesperson that I want to find in this case, is going to be Jen. So I'm not going to make this an absolute reference, and you'll understand why in a moment for that. And then my product. So I want to make sure that the product is kept stable, but then lipstick, I'm going to leave that as a relative reference. And if I close my bracket, that will give me my total amount of revenue for Jen and lipstick. So if I go down here, I should be able to validate that Jen sold $3,953.30 of lipstick. What I can then do is if I want to expand on this and I want to see Cece's sales for mascara and Betsy's sales for foundation and Emily's sales for eyeliner. The way that I built my formula, because I have my relative references and my absolute references, when I drag that down, it works to look up these each of these individual items. So you can build this so that you reference Jen in quotation marks within the formula. That's not best practices, and it also doesn't allow for this flexibility so that you can add additional fields underneath. Now, the next thing I want to look at before I move on from this pivot table is sum of dollars. I'm just going to update that so that it's clear that it's total revenue. And you'll notice that even though I've changed this field and this field here, this hasn't changed. So if I change this to total revenue, that works fine. I can update that on all of my calculations. So no issues in going in and updating your pivot table if you've realized that you've forgotten to do one of your best practices with renaming the column names. So now the next thing we're going to do, similar, I'm going to copy my data again. I'm going to give a couple of rows in between. And now what I'm looking for is similar, but instead of having my product, I want to have my location. Again, the location and the salesperson, it's not a parent-child relationship, so I want to make sure that I drag my location so that it's in columns so you can clearly see total sales by location, you know, East, Midwest, South, West, and then again by each individual salesperson. And then we've got our total revenue by each salesperson broken down by location. So I'm just going to update my title to be revenue by location by salesperson for 2004 to 2006. And then the last piece on this one is I want to look at total revenue by salesperson and year. So let's see what we're going to do for that. So I know I can get rid of location because I'm just looking at total revenue by salesperson and year. So I go back. Two ways to get rid of location. I can either drag it up into my field listing, or I can deselect it right here in the field listing by unchecking the box. Now I want to include my date. So if I include my date, you'll see something funky happens here where it's got my year, quarter, and date. So it's expanded from being one field with the date to 3 different columns. So if I right click on this, you'll see there's an option of group or ungroup. In this case, because my date, if I go back and look at my data, you can see that it's an actual date by day. And I want to consolidate this so I'm able to report by year. So in order to do that, I do want to group my date, but I only want to group it by year, which means these months and quarters, I want to deselect those and just leave it so that years is highlighted. And now you'll see I've got my salesperson name and my date. And once again, I'm going to drag my date so that it's in my columns. And you can see I've got my sales by year. And it is going by up by year. So it goes 2004, 2005, 2006. And when you see that, you can kind of start to see that there is a downward trend here. So you can start looking at which individual sales reps are seeing the decline in sales by year, but clearly there is something going wrong on an annual basis here in the fact that the sales are declining. You could also look at this by product by year to see if it's a specific product, or maybe if it is a specific salesperson where you're seeing this decline. You can do a pivot chart to kind of see that trend. And then I'm going to add my column, revenue by year by salesperson. And you can really see how you can do some analysis based on this. And if you started with just your original pivot table of just the total number of transactions by salesperson, doesn't really tell you what's happening. But as you start digging into it, you can kind of see which products are doing the best by salesperson. Maybe certain salespeople should only be selling certain products because they're really strong at them. Which people are selling the most in each region, which region has the most revenue. And then when you get into the last pivot table, you can see that there was a decline year over year. So obviously some conversations that need to happen on what's causing this decline in sales, especially when you look at someone like Jen has gone up, but then Halogen has kind of consistently gone down. And that is all for this one.